A new episode of You and the Law Podcast, the one and only law enforcement podcast that's tackling critical policing and social justice issues and provides insights into the daily realities of policing with your host, Chief Virgil Green.
So the University of Mount St. Vincent, since our founding, has been about providing opportunities for our students that extend within and beyond the classroom.
And if you think about the history of an institution like the University of Mount St. Vincent, engagement with the community is in the very DNA.
After our meeting with Q, it almost felt like we were summoned to do the work that we're getting ready to do. So it just felt like a natural fit.
I feel the one word that D2C will bring to the University of Mount St. Vincent is trust.
Cooperating or building a relationship with D2C will give us better structure for our students who are interested in criminology and social justice.
They'll be able to take the skills and resources learned through the tools that D2C brings to our campus.
They lead with heart, they lead with soul, and they lead with compassion and care for the human.
We'll teach, we'll have symposia, we'll have conferences, seminars. We're going to bring a level of expertise with subject matter experts to this campus that will be unique to academia.
What we're going to do is not just going to impact our students, our faculty, our staff, and our administration of the University of Mount St. Vincent, of the D2C Justice Institute, but it's going to have an impact as they leave our campus, as they have impact with each other outside of this campus, as our society needs to see this impact in a way that not only affects today, but affects the years to come.
I want to welcome everybody to another episode of You and the Law Podcast. I'm the host of the show, Chief Virgil Green. And as always, I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in and join what's definitely going to be another informative episode on You and the Law Podcast. And let me bring on my guest who was just featured in that video. Bring on Brother Q. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Chief. How are you?
Man, I'm doing good, man. It is definitely good to connect with you after some years you being on the podcast. Man, it's probably been about, 4 years maybe.
Wow, has it been that already?
Yeah, man. This is our 6th year doing the podcast. And, when I did it with you before, I think I may have had my co-host on. I don't know if it was just me and you, but my co-host, Chief Humphrey. But he kind of took a back seat to doing the podcast earlier in the year. And so I'm just doing it solo.
Yes, I remember Chief Humphrey. So thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. You know, Q, I don't have to tell you this, man. You already know it. You bring a wealth of knowledge and information to every room you step into. And I just wanted to reach out to you to get you to come back on the podcast and just talk about, things that's going on in the criminal justice system and as well as policing. And so for those who do not know Q like I do, tell our audience about you and what you're doing. And because you definitely have an amazing background in criminal justice and in law enforcement and now in the private sector.
Well, thank you again, Chief. So my name is Quentin Williams, and I'm here because we connected through Dedication to Community, which is the national nonprofit that we founded about 20 years ago. And we founded it for the purpose of educating society about justice. We started with economic justice. We wanted to give college-age students an opportunity to understand that they could maximize their talents and thrive in this very challenging society. And then that expanded out to be criminal, social, restorative, and procedural justice. We wanted to not just educate people about the outcome of thriving, but we wanted to also have them understand the journey to get there might not be that simple. And so there's a need to know how to survive and thrive. So those 5 pillars of justice are what we concentrate on. and we do it through dedication to communities, teachings, through the D2C Justice Institute at Mount St. Vincent, the University of Mount St. Vincent in New York City. And we do it through partners like you who are just outstanding human beings.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're definitely welcome. And you know, Q, you've built a you know, so many different partnerships from around the country. And one of those, if you don't mind speaking on, is the with the Miami Heat. You know, how you partnered with them to bring in dedicated to community. Kind of speak to us on that, and how did that come about, and how is that initiative going over the last couple of years that you've been doing it?
Sure. So we've been partnered with the Heat since 2020. After George Floyd was killed, the Heat wanted to do something, and they wanted to do something with the police, with whom they have great relationships, but they wanted to bring something to the police agencies. And we teach police agencies how to build relationships and how to serve better, not to police better. And so they brought us in, and we piloted a few education sessions, and that led to educating entire agencies down there with the support of the Miami Heat and now Florida Blue and other organizations as well, introduced to us by the Miami Heat. So the Miami Heat, it's been 6 years. We're on our 6th year now. They really do a lot, and they do a lot in society. Steve Stowe is the head of community, their foundation there, and works closely with the basketball folks to ensure that they do as much as they can possibly do in the community.
Yeah,
we're really proud of that.
Yeah, yeah. So the Miami Heat, I mean, they have you know, it's just not the Miami Heat. I mean, they have a much larger portfolio of different business organizations that they're involved with. And so it's good to see that that is actually growing out to other organizations. So when you talk about, you know, going in and talking to law enforcement about building better relationships with their communities, how has that been going? Because as you know, even before George Floyd and since George Floyd, there's been a lot of I would say interest put back into law enforcement, really building a much more better relationship with their communities. And you know about the 21st century community policing, and that's one of the 6 pillars of 21st century community policing. And I've said this, Q, before, that some agencies, they just do it just to say we're doing it, but you really don't see any kind of real impactful things that they're doing in their community. So kind of talk about that and how some things that you've seen, good or bad, on what you all have been doing with dedicated to community.
It's been extraordinary because our methodology is through stories. So we tell stories and we give tools and we have engagement, and we do these teachings for law enforcement with the community in the room, so that both parties can understand what the other goes through and perhaps help each other through this journey. And so that's what D2C has been doing for a number of years, about 15 years or so. And we do it with agencies. We've done Miami PD, Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office down in Florida, and North Miami PD, and several others. And the success comes as a result of the storytelling of the instructors and the participants in the audience. They're vulnerable. They become very vulnerable, and that's an essential element of what we do.
Yeah. Well, you know, you're definitely right. I think when you start putting people in a room together that have never been in a room together before, now you realize you have a lot more in common than what you didn't realize. And now barriers are being broken, and it's just not just us against them kind of an attitude, especially when you start telling stories and people starting to see the human side of the police, and the police start seeing the human side of the people that they're out there to protect and serve. And that's real good.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I grew up in poverty, and my mother was a single mother raising two kids, and she's my brother and I are black, my mother's white. So growing up in a black neighborhood, it was always very challenging. So there were challenges in terms of economics and social skills and society and academia for my brother and me. And so I relate very much to the challenges that are happening today in society.
Yeah. Well, and Q, you know, I know the last time we had you on the podcast, and I've heard you talk about this in other spaces, is that, you know, your background, you come from a very interesting, you know, background, and the fact, you know, you grew up in what, Queens or in the New York area, or?
Yes, New York.
Okay. So kind of, you know, speak on that a little bit, as you know, your background, where you came from, because it didn't, you know, from all accounts, just remember talking to you some years ago, you were not a fan of police growing up as a young black kid.
Yeah, I grew up in New York, but I was born on the island of St. Thomas. And when I went to New York with my mother, she was a single mother. My father had abandoned us. I grew up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and it was fairly crime-ridden at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that way now where I grew up. It's beautiful now, but back then it's been gentrified currently. But back then it was tough. My earliest memories of life were from my few years spent on the Lower East Side, and they were not good memories. There was some crime that I remember, purse snatching. I remember all that stuff. And so at a young age, I asked my mother if we could get out of there. And she said yes. And she moved us up to Yonkers, New York, which I don't know if it was any better, because it was, although in the suburbs, Yonkers was tough. But now Yonkers is starting to bloom.
Yeah.
Back then, though, there was a lot of crime and despair and drugs. And so that's where I did all my schooling, was in Yonkers.
Okay.
K through 12.
Okay. And you went on to go to Boston College, played football. I mean, you know, I know I see all the photos of you, you know, especially during football season. You know, you're a proud alumni of Boston College, and kind of talk to us about, you know, how that experience was, and how that has really kind of shaped who you are today.
Yeah, so I've had some pivotal times in my life, and there might be a dozen. Going to Boston College was one of them, because it got me out of Yonkers, like that environment, which I really appreciate Yonkers, but it was an environment I needed to be removed to see that there were other things in the world going on. And so just going a few hours up to Boston from New York was pivotal for me. I got to meet people from different places all over the globe, across the globe. And I learned things there that if I had stayed in Yonkers, I might not have learned. And I have a reading issue, a comprehension deficit when I read. I'm a voracious reader now, but I've had this issue since I was a kid. And when I went to Boston College, I wasn't sure how I was going to do, because the competition is so stiff, I have these issues, although I did well in high school. But it gave me confidence that I was able to get through it, to be a decent student. I wasn't a great student, but I was a decent student. And so I matured a lot at Boston College.
Okay. Yeah, and you had you played football at Boston College, right?
And I played football, and I played with Doug Flutie, and Doug Flutie was the Heisman Trophy winner during my sophomore year. So to see that also gave me encouragement. because Doug is not a big guy. He's a small guy playing the quarterback position, and he did so well at that size.
Yeah.
When not many people, there were a lot of odds against him.
Oh yeah, yeah, I remember.
So for him to do well, and what he did was he showed me that even with deficits, his height and his weight would have been considered a deficit.
Yeah.
You could still thrive. And I have my share of deficits. So that encouraged me a lot.
Yeah. Well, and and I think that's something that whether it's in the sports or the private sector, public sector, whatever it may be, we all have, you put yourself in the position to be successful and in the win. And I think especially you learn that when you're playing sports. And, as you and I spoke before, a real good friend of mine, classmate of mine, played football with him. Timmy Smith went on to play with the Redskins, him and Doug Williams. And nobody ever expected a kid to come out of Hobbs, New Mexico, to go play football at Texas Tech University, to ever end up being in a Super Bowl playing with Doug Williams, and to break Marcus Allen's rushing record, a record that still holds to today. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, he wasn't just in the Super Bowl. He was the MVP of the Super Bowl.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And we talk about that every time we talk. It's something that a lot of people don't realize. Even coming, like the background you came from, and Timmy and I, we come from a community that's less than 50,000 people. We had good we were brought up. We didn't have a lot of crime that we saw in our community. But there were some challenges there growing up, and to leave the community and to be successful in sports and in the private sector just shows that you really have to put a lot of work into what you want to do. And I think that's really important, especially when you get out to talking to young kids about changing their life around. And you can speak on that, how you all get out into the communities and talk to these young kids about, there is a better way of giving back to your community, and you don't have to be out here doing drugs and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, a big part of what we do is we want to educate the young leaders of today
exactly
how to live their lives with fullness, and so because they're going to be the leaders of tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we do it through different methodologies, but one platform we use is the traffic stop safety platform. We educate people, not just youngsters, about what to do on law enforcement traffic stops.
Okay.
That gives us the segue into talking about leadership and relationship building. And so we even have the state of North Carolina, through the Governor's Highway Safety Program, funds what we do across the state.
Okay.
Traffic stop safety. It's the only program like it in the nation.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're proud of that.
Yeah. Well, and it's glad you brought that up, because I was going to mention that I just saw what that initiative just kind of kicked off not too long ago, and really wanted to kind of get, a little bit more information as to how did that come about. And because again, everything starts with a traffic stop, and it could be a good traffic stop, could be a bad traffic stop. And it's the first encounter where a police officer can have either a positive impact on a family, or it can be negative. And you've seen this. You've been, former FBI agent, federal prosecutor, so you've seen the negative impacts that could have, especially on Black people.
Yeah, the traffic stops are. So we say that if you're driving, there's close to 100% chance you're going to be pulled over at some point in your life.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It's just the chances are very high.
It is
the course of a driving life that you're going to be pulled over. So why not know exactly what to do?
Yeah,
and so that's why we teach traffic stop safety, and so it resonates with everybody, because whether you're Black or white or male or female or whatever your persuasion, this will affect you in some way.
Yeah.
And it's good to know exactly what to do, to have a game plan for it.
Yeah.
And most of all, to know that no matter what happens, you're going to comply now and complain later if there's an issue.
Exactly.
So it's really interesting because we just did this for a driver education instructors conference, and we're teaching driver education instructors how to teach their students. And a day after we did it, one of the instructors texted me and said, I was just pulled over. And I was pulled over for speeding. I don't think I was speeding, but I was pulled over. And as a result of being in that session with you, I remained calm.
Mm-hmm.
I did everything right. And I got home safely. And there were no issues. I got a citation, but that's it.
Yeah.
So this affects everybody, even driver education instructors. And that's why we think it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's good to see that you've got a state like North Carolina seeing how important something like that is. And hopefully, there's other, highway safety, people around the country who will see that, hey, this is something that will definitely benefit everybody in across the United States and to be implemented. Because again, we talk about traffic safety, and that's something that I've been a real big supporter of being involved in traffic safety because we have a lot of people, once again, people for some reason don't like wearing their seatbelts. It's become more common now. But, back 20 years ago, we were doing a lot of initiative through our highway safety office around a very large Black rodeo event to talk about traffic safety. And it was something that was so important because, like you said, everybody drives, and, you get a lot of young people in the car, a lot of crazy things happen, but it's really important to talk to young people about the safety of driving a vehicle and what to do and what not to do when you're pulled over by a police officer.
Yep, I agree. It's one of the most important yet simple things to plan, to strategize for. And if you know exactly what to do, even if you forget some of it, at least if you know to comply and complain later, that gets you home safely. That's what we want. And if there's an issue with an officer who is just not doing the right thing, you complain about that at every level, because we don't need officers who aren't going to be good officers. It makes the good officers uncomfortable and makes them look bad. So, this is really an important initiative.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, Key, I want to just remind those just now coming on the podcast that tonight's guest is Quentin Williams. He's the founder and CEO of Dedicated to Community, D2C, and he is a former FBI agent, former federal prosecutor. Man, you've got like I said at the top of the podcast, you've got an amazing background, and you bring a lot of knowledge and information. And tonight on You and the Law podcast, we're going to be talking about, can justice, let me get it up here. I think I kind of got a little, can justice be fixed or can justice be managed? That's a pretty broad question. Can it be fixed and can it be managed? And Q, since you, with your background in the federal government and you seeing so many things that happen in the communities, and one of the things we're going to be talking about is a video I'm be showing here in a little bit. You continue to see so many things that could have been prevented. And why do you think these things are still occurring across the country? And what does it take to get some of these things fixed to where people of any race, but especially in the Black community, are being, when you do get involved in the criminal justice system, you're being treated fairly and equally?
I think when we talk about the system's flaws and what we need to do with the system, we need to first acknowledge what the history of the system is in order to make it better. Let's learn from that history. Let's know that we're not going to make the same mistakes, and then we can proceed. And as we're doing that, we're also gaining the trust of those who are a part of the system, because we're recognizing the whole system, not just what's great about it, but also what's flawed. And that builds trust. And when we acknowledge the history, we start to build trust. The issue we're having in today's society is a lot of people want to leave our history behind, and they want to ignore it. And I think that's doing such a disservice to everybody, because we're not fully learning about who we are, because that's who we are. We are our history. So I think the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that history.
Well, Q, and I've said this on the podcast before, and I don't, I know you attend a lot of law enforcement conferences like ICP and Noble, but there was an ICP conference in San Diego. Man, it's been 10 years ago.
Cunningham.
The comment that was made.
The President Cunningham.
And to see so many executive police chiefs from around, it wasn't a lot, but it definitely was noticeable how they reacted to him apologizing for law enforcement, the actions and attitude. And you had so many people felt like, well, you're not speaking for me. And I think, to me, that just really shows how embedded the culture of policing is, and how you have people at the highest level who have a issue with acknowledging and recognizing and trying to be a part of creating a different environment for especially people of color to be in. But it just goes to show you the embedded racism within policing.
We have to look at how law enforcement started in our nation with slave patrols. I mean, it's chronicled history. This is the truth.
And Q, that's something, when you mention the slave patrols, there are people who will argue up and down, oh no, law enforcement didn't come from slave patrol, it came from Sir Robert Peel. I'm like, wait a second, you really need to know your history. But that just goes to show you just how some people don't want to know the history. They want to ignore the history, as you said.
Right. In America, and especially in the South, law enforcement began, the incarnation of law enforcement with slave patrols. And the South, people migrated up to the North. So why would we not want to pay attention to that and learn from it and gather the tools that we could gather from those experiences to create trust instead of distrust? Because we have a lot of distrust, generational distrust. And that generational distrust dates back to the slave patrols, because after grandparents are telling grandkids, don't trust them, and that's generational. It continues all the time. Here we are today with grandparents telling their grandkids, don't trust them. And there might be no real reason not to trust them. They may have had no bad experience, but they've been told not to trust them. So now you're starting off from that position of distrust.
Well, and I think for a lot of people, I'm not going to say a lot of people, but for some, everybody has, especially in policing, has the attitude, Q, that, well, I didn't do anything to you.
Right.
That was before me. I didn't do anything. But you got to understand, like I said, the history. And I think that's why it's so important, especially your organization, going in and having these conversations with the police and with the community to get them to really start talking and to see why so many people in the Black community have such a distrust. And it's not just because of, hey, you particularly did something to me. Right. It could have been a family member, it could have been a friend, but that's what, as you just mentioned, grandparents and great grandparents, they're going to say, "Hey, we don't trust the police," and especially in a younger generation, their attitude is going to be different. And so again, it's really important to have those conversations and for police to acknowledge that we got it wrong, but how can we fix it? You know.
Yeah, I think you brought up such a good point with Cunningham when he was a president of ISCP, and he got up on stage and said, "I just want to apologize for the history of law enforcement." And he lost about a third of his membership.
Oh yeah,
on this day.
yeah, he did.
And I often think that he took a lot of courage to do what he did. The thing that he could have done that may have penetrated, because there's a lot of defensiveness about this issue.
It is.
And he could have said, we need to acknowledge, but not apologize for that history, because we were not the ones to be slave patrols.
Yeah.
We weren't the ones who were sicking dogs on people during the civil rights movement, because that's 60 years ago.
Yeah.
But he could have said, we need to acknowledge it so that we can learn from it, and so that we can teach our next generation of law enforcement officers about the mistakes we've made in the past so that we don't do it again. And we need to then also be able to communicate with the community that it's not made up about this.
Yeah.
This is real.
This is real. Yeah.
And this happened, and we're not going to be that again. It's what Germany does with the Holocaust.
Just ignore it, dismiss it.
Well, Germany, you know, they had the most atrocious, perhaps next to the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're both the most atrocious world history events that we know of. And Germany, instead of ignoring it, they actually display it. They display the history.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to ever forget. They never want it to happen again. And that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I don't want to bring up politics and bring up certain people in this conversation, but as we've seen over the past couple of years, that there has been this effort to erase the history. When you talk about the African American Museum in DC, you talk about all these things that have been around for decades, and now all of a sudden, here's this talk about DEI and all this other things, and we don't need to see that. But it is disheartening to see people in positions of power to want to just erase it. You're not going to erase it because it's there, but you're just trying to take away the physical looking at it. And I think you've got some people who will say, well, you get rid of monuments and stuff, but what does those monuments stand for?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the monuments they're talking about are of civil rights, civil war losers. So where do we give trophies to Civil War losers? They get a participant trophy, but they get a participant trophy in Town Square, 100 feet above Town Square. No, we can place those remembrances in museums. That's what museums are for.
Yeah,
not in Town Square. That's just I think it's ridiculous that we would have Civil War losers in the middle of Town Square with statues.
Yeah.
That's much different than the acknowledgement of our history, the history that we need to remember, and doing it in an appropriate way.
Yeah.
So I don't want to erase the Civil War, and I don't want to erase those who lost the Civil War. I want us to remember that Civil War, why we were in it, and who was participating in it. So let's do that in a museum. let's also do the same thing with the acknowledgement of our history of law enforcement, slave patrols, and other civil rights issues.
Yeah. Well, Q, and this is something that this just occurred several years ago. And there was a movie that was made about it. There was a gentleman who was a former, I want to say he was a Marine, or I believe he was a Marine. He was killed. He had some PTSD. The police officer were called to his apartment. He refused to open up the door. I think he accidentally hit some type of a medical alarm that was why the police were called. And it ended up resulting in the police officers ended up kicking in the door. This man ended up losing his life, being killed by the police. And it just again, you have police officers who don't have any empathy. They don't have any concern. And this man, like I said, he wasn't breaking any laws. I think he may have had a knife on him, but he was on the other side of the door. And instead of them basically, de-escalating the situation, walking away, trying to get somebody that can really talk to him, they decided to kick in the door and shot and killed him. And I've got to look it up because I'm pretty sure once I say this gentleman's name, it's probably something that you remember. But it just goes to show you, even after what happened with George Floyd, and even going back to what happened in LA, some 30 years ago, we continue to see how policing has evolved and gotten better, but you still see pockets where police officers are not being held accountable, and communities are still feeling like, what just happened? What did we just see? And I think that's something that, I don't know how you can speak on that, but again, we've come a long way. And I really thought after 21st century community policing that, people would start changing their attitudes, but it really didn't change. It moved the needle some, but it didn't move the needle to where it really should have been.
Yeah, I agree with you that we should be farther along on the spectrum than we are right now. And I think that I'm an eternal optimist, so the glass is half full all the time with me. So I believe that we can be where we should be if we commit to education. And once people learn about that history, and it's all in the way it's delivered, once people learn, they'll start to maybe formulate empathy at another level.
Yeah.
If it's done in a certain way. That empathy goes a long way. It gets people to listen and learn and understand.
It definitely does. Well, Keith, there's a video that I want to show. It's a news clipping of the governor of Alabama commutes the death sentence of a man who didn't kill anyone. And this man is served decades in prison. And it just reminds me of Anthony Ray Hinton and so many other men, Black men, who've been in prison for decades, and they get out. They were convicted of crimes that never committed. And so I want to show this here and kind of get your take on it on the other side.
I'll bring you an update now to a story we brought you on Friday about an Alabama man on death row who did not kill anyone. Charles Sonny Burton was set to be executed on Thursday, but just hours ago, the governor commuted his death sentence. Burton was one of 6 men involved in an armed robbery in 1991 that ended with the murder of a customer, Doug Battle. Burton did not pull the trigger in the shooting. Like Burton, the gunman was also set to face execution. His sentence was commuted years ago. Our Dan Slepian spoke with Burton from prison before his sentence was commuted. Remember, this was part of our story we brought you here on HJN on Friday.
Did you know a murder was about to happen?
No, I didn't assist nobody. I didn't aid nobody. I didn't tell nobody to shoot nobody.
Now, minutes after that piece aired last week, the Alabama governor's office told NBC the governor had no plans to grant Burton clemency. But today, it appears the governor has changed her mind. Kay Ivey saying in an 11th hour ruling that executing Burton would be unjust. Burton is now sentenced to life without parole. We'll keep you posted with any further developments on that.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News.
You know, Q, I think one of the most disturbing things about that, here's a man who went into prison as a young man, and now he's an older man in a wheelchair.
Yeah. Dan Slepian's a good friend of mine, and when he told me about the story, Dan has gotten 6 people from Sing Sing exonerated who should not have been in prison, one of whom is J.J. Velasquez. And when I heard about the story, it was heartbreaking because, yes, you're right. He goes in as a young, not even a man, young teenager.
Teenager, yeah.
And he's now an elderly man, and he was set to be executed while the person who participated in the crime has been out of prison for 10 years, I believe, already.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very disturbing. Our legal system is flawed. It's so flawed. They or we say it's the best in the world, but it's extremely flawed. It's not the best to many people. And we have a lot of folks who are in prison who should not be in prison, and some who are in prison. And although they may deserve to be there, to have been convicted, they shouldn't be in for the length of time.
Yeah.
So we have to correct these injustices at some point. It's too much what's going on.
Yeah. Well, how can those be corrected? How can they? I mean, even, here's a governor who, by all accounts, he waited to the last minute. And my thing, what would the state of Alabama benefited by executing this man?
Nothing, because he wasn't the one who
pulled the trigger.
They got him on felony murder because he drove the car, was in the car,
yeah,
but he didn't go in and didn't really know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe he deserved to be locked up for a little while.
Yeah,
but
not life.
Yeah, that life, and then to be on death row, two different things.
Yeah.
And that's where the flaw is in our system. And if he had better representation, maybe he would have had a different outcome. There are different levels of representation depending on your economic status.
Well, it's good you say that, because if you got the money, you can afford a decent defense. But if you don't, you're going to have an attorney that the court has appointed. That attorney may not even know who you are, or really have any reason to care about you. And just watching the movie Mercy, it just the individuals who were portrayed in that movie, all those were real stories. But it just goes to show you just how even and I've said this before, Q. Everything starts with the police. The initial investigation of a crime. And you have some police officers who will coerce people into admitting to a crime that they didn't even commit. And now all of a sudden you got a person who didn't do anything, but now they're going to go to court, and now they're going to get a public defender who doesn't really care about them and just say, hey, take this plea deal. Yeah, that's the best I can do. And next thing you know, you're thinking, oh, I may get, 10 years or 20 years, but now all of a sudden you're doing life or facing the death penalty.
Yeah, it's you know, public defenders have a very challenging job because they have such large caseloads,
They do.
and they need to clear those caseloads. They're not going to trial with every case they have, and it's common knowledge that most cases don't go to trial. So they are expected to plea these deals out, and when they plea them out, they're looking to clear it. But it does start with the police. You're so right. It starts with, is the system just with police? Is there justice with the police? And you know, the vast majority of police officers are great. They're doing what they need to do. They're serving well.
Yeah.
But there are some who are all about the statistics,
Yeah.
trying to get those numbers. And if they're not getting the numbers they want, might try to push to get those numbers.
Yeah.
And that's where there's an issue. We have to select the right people for these extremely powerful positions. And then we have to educate them really well, and we have to make them accountable when they need to be made accountable, and we need to reward them when they need to be rewarded. And lastly, we need to retain them if they're really good, because good ones leave.
Yeah, they do.
The good ones to stay.
Yeah.
Those are the pillars of any successful organization: selection, education and training, accountability, and retention. We need to apply it in the right way with law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, Key, I want to get your opinion on this. You know, not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but just because you get around the country a lot, and there's a lot of there's a lot of police departments that are doing a lot of good changing the culture of their agencies.
Yeah.
But there are some that don't feel that they really need to. What, in your opinion, what do you see? How do you see policing? Has policing evolved in the last five? How has policing evolved in the past 5 years since George Floyd?
I believe that after George Floyd, law enforcement was moving, because it was forced to, moving in the direction of greater transparency, better relationship building with the communities that are being served. And I believe that happened, and then up until a point, it started to become a check the box kind of thing.
Yeah.
And now I'm not too sure that some of them may have regressed a little.
Went back. Yeah.
Yeah. There are a lot who haven't. There are a lot who are still very much involved, doing great work, by the way. But there are some who have just gone back, and I think that's an issue.
Yeah.
And we need to encourage those agencies to keep taking steps forward, not backward.
Not backwards. Well, and you know, with your work in the Florida area, and I think, you know, as we're talking, it just popped in my mind what happened with Tyreek Hill, you know, the football player, and how those officers handle that situation. And again, it just kind of really goes to show you, you know, you can train police officers. Officers can attend, you know, all sorts of different type of trainings, but it's what they're doing in the field and how they are treating the citizens. And to me, that was just a clear example of some officers, just an officer being rogue and just kind of not having doing the right thing, because again, it's a power trip. And I, you know, you may not like somebody not rolling the window down, but I'm just like, you know, at the end of the day, man, this was somebody that you knew. It was clear you knew who this person was in the vehicle, and you knew he was on his way to a football game. Why? And even after the fact, their attitude was, well, we didn't do anything wrong. He should have just complied. And I'm like, see, that's where people see that. And it's like, well, if they're doing that to Tyreek Hill, what do you think they're going to do to me? And I'm not even a football player.
Yeah, I think whenever there's an opportunity to de-escalate, it has to be done. And he's outside of the stadium, and he's in a $400,000 vehicle.
Yeah.
And he's Tyreek Hill, and everybody pretty much knows who he is down in South Florida.
Yeah.
So is there a way to de-escalate that? There probably is. And why isn't it done? The ego is a very fragile thing.
Yes, sir.
And not everybody has the same level of strength or weakness.
Yeah.
So you're only in a group, you're only as good as the weakest ego.
Yeah.
Because it's like the chain. The chain is only as good as the weakest link.
Yeah.
So when you see a guy, $400,000 car, and he's a superstar, and he's outside of a stadium, and he's mouthing off some, Tyreek was.
Yeah.
He was mouthing off. But are those words going to penetrate you in a certain way? Depends on your ego.
Yeah.
If you know how to de-escalate, diffuse it, maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think everybody could have done better. I think he could have done better too.
Oh, yeah.
But everybody could have done better. It didn't need to be at that level.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he admitted to that, the next day, that he could have handled things better. I don't really recall that the officers said that they could handle anything better. Again, it just kind of goes to the culture of policing and the fact that we have this attitude: if I tell you to do something, you better do it. And if you don't do it, there's consequences to that. And to me, Q, that just kind of goes back to that slave patrol mentality.
Yeah.
It really takes you back to that era, because you were being told to do something, and if you refused to do it, there was grave consequences.
Yeah.
And I think that is still in the minds of a lot of people of color today, that if I don't do what you tell me to do, there's going to be some serious consequences. And Q, I don't know if you saw this video. It was a viral video that took place in Arkansas earlier in the month, where a white police chief slaps a handicapped man sitting in a wheelchair. The only thing that this man, he was a little verbal, but the police chief slaps him, and then he begins to choke him. And then all of a sudden, it took a split second for him to realize, what the hell am I doing? But the damage had already been done. I mean, this was all caught on a person's cell phone, and like I said, man, it was a viral video. It's all over YouTube, TikTok. But why would you put yourself in that position? And I think the one thing that people get caught up in is that, once again, I'm ordering you to do something, and if you don't do it, I'm the police, and that's a problem. You're not listening to my authority,
right? And under many circumstances, it's appropriate, because it's a dangerous. It's a dangerous profession, and you do have to assert authority. And if you don't, it could cost you your life.
Yeah.
It takes a special person to be a cop, as you know, and if you don't have that certain something, you shouldn't be one.
Exactly.
Because you can take life and liberty immediately. It takes a split second for you to take life and liberty.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that if you do that you do it properly, and that you do it with morality too, not just legality, because it can be lawful but awful.
Yeah.
And so you want to be able to balance that. Unless somebody has been a cop, it's really hard to know how to face those situations in those split seconds. But there are times when training and education will just take over, and disposition will just take over and allow someone to de-escalate a situation that could have easily been in the other direction.
Exactly.
Those are the ones we need. Well, and I'm all for. I'm not all for numbers. Like I'd rather have smaller numbers of cops who are better than
Yeah.
have a large number of cops who have presence, but you're taking a chance.
Exactly. And I think, when we talk about police reform and we talk about, procedural justice, and we talk about being fair and equal treatment, we're not we're not in the 80s and the 90s when there was a war on drugs. We still have a drug problem. I don't think we have the gang problems like we did in the 80s and 90s. There are still gangs, in communities, but I think the problem we have is that it's within the police industry, not wanting to change. And I'm not saying not every agency is that way, but you do have some. And again, it goes back to training, and to get back on to what you all do at Dedicated to Community. Is bringing in these experts, people who have been in law enforcement, and you have a lot of people who are with your organizations that come from the background of law enforcement, and what do they bring to Dedicated to Community when you're out here speaking to people in law enforcement and to the community?
Our instructors are made up of current and former law enforcement folks, also academics and corporate people and judges, and we have a bunch of different backgrounds. The pedigrees are fairly vast.
Oh, yeah.
What they bring is their experience about how they have handled the most challenging circumstances you could possibly handle as a cop.
Yeah.
And so when we're teaching, that's a great deal of credibility that walks through the door, because they've done it, they're doing it. And I personally believe that the vast majority of cops are doing the right thing. But here's the thing: we have 800,000, maybe 750,000 law enforcement officers in the nation right now.
Yeah.
And if you have, let's say, 90% of them are great.
Yeah.
What about the other 10%?
10%. Yeah.
The other 10% are terrorizing places.
Yeah.
And that other 10%, by the way, is a fairly large number, because 750, that means you have 75,000 law enforcement officers who should not be law enforcement officers.
Exactly.
So that's a lot of law enforcement officers. And it only takes one to terrorize a community.
Yeah.
So you have a number like that.
Yeah. Well, we've all heard it just takes one bad apple. Yeah. Well, it may be more than one bad apple, and that apple is put seeds out to the other people in the department. Yeah. and it's definitely changed the culture of that department. And again, that's where having a strong leader at the top that sets the tone. And you talk to a lot of police chiefs and sheriffs from around the country. If you don't have that type of leadership structure, you're going to see some agencies continue to be in the news for all the wrong reasons, but not the right reasons.
Yeah, I agree. Stephanie Daniels is our chairperson of our nonprofit, and she's a former director of the Miami-Dade Police Department, which is now the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office. And she's an example, as is Rosie, who is Sheriff Rosie, the Miami-Dade sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Tim Shaw in Stamford, Connecticut, and Ben Murphy is a deputy chief in Connecticut at an agency. And we have so many examples of great law enforcement leaders like yourself. There are a plethora of great law enforcement leaders.
Yeah.
The industry is safe with them.
Yeah.
It's the smaller number of people who allow their ego to get in the way and maybe don't handle situations well. Some who just shouldn't be law enforcement officers. Those are the ones who we need to filter out. And I think the good ones are starting to understand that.
Yeah. Well, and you've seen this too, Q, is that, since, after everything happened with the pandemic, and especially after George Floyd, there were just a lot of people, I'm going to say, took advantage and said, "Hey, I want to get out of this profession." Some said, "Hey, it was PTSD," and once that got to spreading around, it was pretty much like wildfire. It was like a wildfire going on, where so many people jumped on that bandwagon with PTSD, and now you're seeing a lot of agencies, especially like in Minneapolis, that are still struggling to recruit. Great leader in Chief O'Hara, but you have a lot of people, agencies are just not really able to recover. And it's because you have a lot of people just don't want to be police officers, Q. You have a lot of men and women who don't, but you have still a lot who do, but they rather be in the private sector than be in the public sector.
And when we talk about Minneapolis, we talk about a few things, but when we start with George Floyd and Chauvin, that's one person who did that to our world, not just to our nation, to our world.
Yeah.
So it just takes one, which is unfortunate.
Well, and it's good you said that, man, because, that's something that I've said before, is that one person, if there were so many signs that had happened before that he shouldn't have not been on the Minneapolis Police Department, but he was, and that one individual changed how every person around this world looked at policing, and it was a movement that policing was not ready for. Right. And I believe, and unfortunately, it took the death of a Black man for people to really see the ugly side of policing that people had forgot about, that they were seeing. I was born in 63. And so, I come up, during the civil rights era, but I just remember things as a young kid. And just as what happened yesterday with the Voting Rights Act, I think I was 2 years old when that was signed into law. And here it is, some 60 years later, and it's being, we're going backwards instead of forward.
Yeah. I was born in 65, and yes, we are going backwards in many ways. I still think we're headed in the right direction in many ways too, but there are reminders of our past all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that if it's as simple as this, if we could get human beings to treat human beings like human beings, our world would be so much better. That's the simplicity of life. And we haven't gotten to that place yet because we're divided along political and social lines.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, Q, as we wrap up the podcast, I think, it is hard to ignore that racism still exists.
Very much. Very much.
And you see it every single day. And unfortunately, it just kind of blows my mind at just how comfortable people are with their racist attitudes. And I think, again, and like what we saw with the female cop in Houston, that was just like unbelievable. And I'm just like, how did she pass her background? How did she get to where she was at? I mean, there had to been some signs along the way, but it wasn't caught. And that young lady just kind of, it showed, hey, now you got people saying, see, things really haven't changed. Look at her. You would never look at her and think that you would see that type of racist come from a young lady like her.
Yeah. It still exists. There are folks who deny that it exists, which again, we have to get to that place of acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And until we get to acknowledgement, we will not move on as a society. So forgetting that it happened is not the way to move on as a society. It will not happen. It's not the way we're constructed as human beings. We need acknowledgement.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Q, man, it has been a pleasure, man. And hopefully it won't be another, 4 years to get you to come back on the podcast, because again, I always want to reach out to you because, like I said at the top of the podcast, you bring so much knowledge and information to the conversation around the criminal justice system and policing. And I just can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on You and the Law podcast and talk to me about, can justice be fixed, and how does that going to look?
Yeah. Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So Q, tell those how can they find out more about Dedicated to Community and what you're doing across the country?
We have we're on socials at Dedication to Community. My socials are M.Quentin Williams, Quentin spelled like Quentin Tarantino, Quentin. And our website is dedicationtocommunity.org, dedicationtocommunity.org. There's plenty of information online that you can figure out what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it.
Yeah. Well, Quentin, I have to tell you, man, my son is named Quentin. And it's spelled just like yours is. So yeah, man.
That's a wonderful thing.
It is. So, well, again, man, I definitely want to appreciate you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on and talk to me and my guest on You and the Law podcast. And, as always, man, it's a pleasure, and I'll be keeping up with you, and hopefully we can do this again.
Absolutely, Chief. Thank you so much. God bless you, and thank you for doing what you do.
All right, appreciate it. And everybody, thank you for tuning in for You and the Law podcast, and make sure that you tune in next Thursday, because it's definitely going to be another informative episode on You and the Law podcast. Have a good night.
That's a wrap on this episode of You and the Law podcast. We've got more eye-opening conversations and hard-hitting insights coming your way, so make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and stay ready, because the next episode might just change the way you see law enforcement forever.